She was screaming in pain, sweating, shaking, gasping for air. Her skin turned cold. Her eyes, wild, and then, silence. Just 4 days after that smoothie, Betty was dead. Alan stood by her hospital bed. Tears in his eyes, voice breaking. He told doctors it was a rare disorder, something sudden, unstoppable. They believed him. After all, he was one of them. But behind closed doors, things didn't add up. His browser history was filled with poisons. His diagnoses are all a lie. And Betty's life insurance, $500,000, signed just weeks before. Even worse, he was already on dating apps, calling himself a widower, before the funeral had even started. The truth wasn't in the lab results. It was in the search bar, in the lies, in the silence. This wasn't a mystery. It was a plan, and the clock had been ticking all along. The case of Betty Bowman, what really happened?
But before we dive into this story in detail, answer this. Was this really a sudden tragedy, or the perfect murder in plain sight? And please subscribe to our channel. Let's demystify stories like this together.
In the heart of Rochester, Minnesota, amid the snow-blanketed streets and gleaming hospital towers, a love story blossomed, or so it seemed. Betty Bowman was the kind of woman who left a lasting impression. At 32 years old, she had risen to become a respected pharmacist at the prestigious Mayo Clinic, known not just for her sharp mind but for the kindness she extended to patients and colleagues alike. She wore compassion like a second skin, her every move deliberate and thoughtful. Her laugh, once a regular melody in the clinic halls, could soften even the most hardened spirits. Connor Bowman, her equal in age and ambition, was no less dazzling. A medical resident specializing in toxicology, Connor was brilliant, charismatic, and outwardly charming, a man with a bright future. His white coat wasn't just a symbol of medicine, it was a badge of authority and aspiration. They met in the sterile glow of hospital lights, surrounded by endless corridors and murmured medical jargon. Between 4 drips and rounds, a spark ignited. Medicine brought them together, and in May 2021, under a canopy of spring blooms, they pledged forever. To the outside world, the Bowmans were the golden couple, intelligent, ambitious, and enviably in sync. They were the kind of love story others wanted to believe in. But fairy tales are often written over cracks no one dares to see. The first signs were easy to dismiss. A missed dinner date here, a stifled argument there. Life was stressful. They were both building demanding careers. Tension was normal, wasn't it? But friends began to notice the subtle shifts. Betty's radiant smiles seemed a little too forced, her laughter strained at the edges. Connor, once attentive and doting, grew distant, his mood swings sharp and erratic. Conversations that once flowed like a river turned brittle, littered with long silences. Then came the whispers. Betty, confiding to a close friend after a few glasses of wine, let slip the things she had been trying desperately to ignore: Connor's mounting debts from medical school, a shadow that clung to their finances. His growing secretiveness. The late nights spent hunched over his phone, the smirk he couldn't quite hide when he thought she wasn't looking. And the final, gut-wrenching revelation: messages. Betty stumbled upon them one evening while doing laundry, flirty, suggestive conversations between Connor and women she didn't know. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the exchanges, her heart shattering with each line. Still, she stayed. They had vowed, for better or for worse, and Betty, ever the optimist, believed in redemption. People made mistakes. Love was about forgiveness. She didn't realize she was already standing on the edge of something much darker. The breaking point came in August 2023. On the evening of August 15th, Betty prepared a fruit smoothie, hoping it might soothe her nerves after a rough shift. It tasted slightly bitter, but she chalked it up to overripe bananas and didn't think much of it. By morning, she was violently ill. The gastrointestinal symptoms were relentless: waves of nausea, vomiting, cramping pain that left her doubled over. Weak and dehydrated, Betty was rushed to the Mayo Clinic, the very institution where she had built her career. Connor was by her side, concerned, attentive. He spoke in clipped, efficient tones to the attending physicians, proposing possibilities: food poisoning, maybe an unusual infection. Then, almost casually, he suggested something rarer: hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, HLH, a rare and aggressive autoimmune condition. The medical team raised eyebrows. HLH was a serious diagnosis, but extremely rare in otherwise healthy adults. Tests were ordered, but they returned inconclusive. Connor pressed them to consider HLH anyway, subtly steering treatment decisions, leveraging his medical background and authoritative tone. Meanwhile, Betty's condition worsened at an alarming pace. Her organs began to fail. Her lungs filled with fluid. Her heart struggled to maintain a rhythm. The woman who had once been a pillar of strength was now a ghostly figure on life support. Doctors, scrambling for answers, found themselves puzzled, and increasingly uneasy. Nothing about Betty's deterioration made sense. And Connor seemed almost too involved. Hovering, controlling, offering explanations that didn't quite fit, pushing for comfort measures instead of aggressive interventions. On August 20th, just 4 days after her sudden illness began, Betty Bowman was pronounced dead. The Mayo Clinic staff gathered in stunned silence. An autopsy was the natural next step. Sudden deaths demanded answers. But Connor protested vehemently. He insisted Betty had wanted to be cremated immediately, that an autopsy was unnecessary, even disrespectful to her memory. He pressured the medical staff, trying to rush the paperwork through. It was only after several members of the hospital's ethics committee raised concerns that the medical examiner intervened and halted the cremation. Betty's body would be examined. The truth, whatever it was, would not be buried alongside her. In the hours and days that followed, strange details began to surface. Staff remembered how insistently Connor had clung to the HLH diagnosis, even when evidence pointed elsewhere. There were whispers of Connor's financial troubles, debts that Betty's life insurance payout would handily erase. And there was his behavior after Betty's death. While still ostensibly grieving, Connor was seen online, updating his dating profiles, describing himself as a widower, and striking up flirtatious conversations with women. His stories about Betty's cause of death shifted with each telling, sometimes food poisoning, sometimes an overdose. Detectives began pulling threads. A search of Connor's devices revealed chilling evidence. Recent internet searches for lethal doses of colchicine based on body weight. Orders for colchicine placed just days before Betty fell ill. Unauthorized access to Betty's medical records in the hospital system. Each discovery painted a darker picture. Connor Bowman, the brilliant young doctor, may not have been trying to save his wife. He may have been plotting her death all along. As investigators compiled their findings into a growing dossier, a toxicology report arrived on the medical examiner's desk. It confirmed the team's worst fears. Betty Bowman had been poisoned. In her bloodstream was a deadly concentration of colchicine, a drug she had no reason to take, a drug that, in the wrong dose, caused the very symptoms she had suffered: nausea, vomiting, organ failure, and death. Betty had trusted Connor with her life. He had weaponized that trust in the most horrific way imaginable. As the autopsy results made their way to law enforcement, an arrest warrant was quietly prepared. But Connor, oblivious to the walls closing in, was already making plans, and not all of them were innocent. August 24, 2023. The late summer sun baked the pavement outside the Rochester Police Department as detectives gathered in a small, windowless briefing room. A file labeled "Bowman, Betty, Suspicious Death" lay open on the table, its contents fanning out like a grim puzzle. Detective Laura Mercer, a seasoned investigator known for her relentless pursuit of the truth, leaned forward, tapping the toxicology report with a scarred fingertip. "Colchicine," she said. Fatal levels.
It was deliberate.
This wasn't a medical accident.
The room fell into a heavy silence. The timeline was tight. The evidence, damning. Within hours, a team was mobilized. Search warrants were secured. Connor Bowman, who had spent the last few days alternating between thin displays of grief and brazen flirtations online, was about to face a reckoning. At 6:42 a.m. the next morning, a convoy of unmarked vehicles pulled into the parking lot of the modest apartment building where Connor had been staying temporarily. Armed with a battering ram and grim determination, officers stormed the unit. Connor was dragged from bed, disoriented and furious, wearing little more than a pair of wrinkled scrubs. "Connor Bowman," Detective Mercer announced, "you're under arrest for the murder of Betty Bowman." His face, once confident and cocky, crumbled into something uglier, a mask of panic and defiance. As he was cuffed and led away, investigators combed through the apartment. The findings were chilling. In his browser history: how much colchicine to kill a 120-pound woman? Signs of colchicine overdose. Can you trace colchicine poisoning? How to delay autopsy results? On his laptop, an unfinished document titled, "New Beginnings, Detailed Plans for Relocating to Another City," complete with a list of bachelor apartments, dating sites to join, and a rough calculation of the insurance payout he expected. On his phone, dating app profiles, active conversations with multiple women, some of them already discussing fresh starts. He wasn't mourning. He was preparing for life after Betty, a life built on her grave. Interviews with friends, colleagues, and neighbors painted a grim portrait of the Bowmans' marriage, far different from the golden facade. Betty had confided in close friends about mounting financial pressure. Connor's gambling debts had spiraled out of control. He owed thousands to loan sharks, credit card companies, even some of his fellow residents. Betty had been contemplating divorce, but she hesitated, afraid of the chaos it would unleash. Connor, investigators concluded, must have realized that a divorce would leave him broke, disgraced, and alone. Murder, it seemed, had presented itself as the more profitable solution. Prosecutors dug deeper into the insurance policies. Betty's life insurance, initially a modest policy, had been increased less than 6 months earlier, at Connor's insistence. The payout? $500,000, enough to wipe his debts clean and start anew. Motive. Means. Opportunity. The case was rapidly becoming airtight. But questions still lurked in the shadows. One crucial element puzzled Mercer: why had Connor risked using colchicine, a toxin he would know could be traced if anyone bothered to look? Why not something subtler? And why the push for an HLH diagnosis, a rare condition that, while it explained Betty's symptoms, didn't match her test results perfectly? The answer, when it came, was as chilling as it was brilliant. Connor hadn't just been arrogant, he had been methodical. Investigators discovered that he had studied medical journals extensively in the months before Betty's death. One particular paper caught Mercer's eye, a case report describing how colchicine poisoning could mimic HLH in its early stages, confusing even experienced physicians. It was a gambit. If Connor could convince doctors Betty had HLH, they might attribute her death to an untreatable autoimmune collapse rather than foul play, and cremate her body before suspicions were raised. He had nearly succeeded. It was only the stubbornness of a few skeptical doctors, and the medical examiner's intervention, that had preserved Betty's body long enough for the truth to surface. Connor had gambled with time, trust, and science. And for a while, it looked like he might have gotten away with it. Inside the sterile gray walls of the interrogation room, Connor sat slouched, a sneer curling his lips. "You have nothing," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "You're grasping at straws." Detective Mercer leaned in slowly, sliding the toxicology report across the table toward him. "Colchicine," she said softly. "Found in her blood. Levels high enough to kill 3 people." Connor flinched, just barely. Mercer pressed on. You ordered it online. We have the receipts. We have your search history. Your fingerprints on the vial we found hidden in your storage locker. Connor's confidence faltered. His eyes darted toward the one-way mirror. You're smart, Mercer said, almost kindly. But not smart enough. Connor's facade cracked then, just for a moment, a flash of pure, naked terror before he folded his arms and sank into sullen silence. Mercer smiled grimly. They had him. But even as prosecutors celebrated, another shockwave hit the investigation. Among Connor's confiscated devices was a second, encrypted hard drive. When forensic techs finally cracked it open, they discovered a hidden folder, labeled with a single word, contingencies. Inside were detailed files, not just about Betty, but about other women he had been speaking to. Women he had met through dating apps. Women who, disturbingly, bore an eerie resemblance to Betty, petite, blonde, trusting. Each profile included notes, details about their finances, health conditions, vulnerabilities. It wasn't just a one-time crime born of desperation. Connor Bowman, it appeared, had been planning a series of relationships, each one a new target. Each woman, a potential victim. Each death, another payout. The realization hit Mercer like a punch to the gut. Betty Bowman had been the first. But she was never meant to be the last. As the walls closed in, the race began, not just to bring Connor to justice for Betty's murder, but to find the women he had marked before it was too late. The discovery of the contingencies folder detonated like a bomb inside the Rochester Police Department. Detective Mercer stared grimly at the files, her heart hammering in her chest. There were 5 women. 5 lives hanging in the balance. Their names were listed alongside chilling details, allergies, medications, recent breakups, even family estrangements. Connor had been studying them, isolating them, preparing them for the same fate as Betty. This wasn't just murder. It was serial predation, sophisticated, calculated, and ruthless. An emergency task force was assembled overnight. They split into teams, one officer assigned to protect each woman, another to work on securing statements, background checks, and evidence. The clock was ticking. Jessica Myers was the first they reached. A bright-eyed veterinary assistant, she had been exchanging flirty texts with Connor for weeks. He had invited her out for a private, camping trip scheduled just days away, a trip that, investigators believed, was going to end in tragedy. Jessica, shaken but safe, agreed to cooperate fully. The others followed. Kendra Lewis, Melissa Hart, Dana Simmons, and Lauren Pierce, all were approached in time, all were horrified to learn how close they had come to becoming headlines. Lauren had even received a special vitamin blend in the mail from Connor, pills that, upon analysis, were found to be laced with low doses of colchicine. If she had taken them over several days, the dose would have built up fatally without immediate suspicion. Connor Bowman hadn't been improvising. He had been perfecting his methods. When the trial of Connor Bowman began in the fall of 2024, the courtroom was a fortress of security, tension, and public outrage. The prosecution, armed with mountains of digital evidence, expert testimonies, and the emotional testimonies of Betty's family and the nearly victimized women, painted a devastating picture of a cold, calculating predator. Connor's defense team tried everything, pleading mental instability, claiming Betty's death was an accident, insisting the contingency files were fictional exercises for a book he was planning to write. But the jury wasn't buying it. Neither was the judge. The most powerful moment came when Betty's sister, Caroline, took the stand. Voice trembling but clear, she faced Connor and said, "You thought she was disposable. You thought none of us would fight for her. You were wrong." It took the jury less than 4 hours to deliver a verdict. Guilty, on all counts. Murder in the first degree. Attempted murder. Premeditated conspiracy. Sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, Connor Bowman left the courtroom in shackles, his head bowed, his life, and his monstrous plans, shattered. Betty Bowman finally received justice, not just for her, but for the countless others she unknowingly saved. Her parents established a foundation in her name, advocating for stronger protections for victims of domestic and financial abuse, especially in cases where one partner holds disproportionate power. The women Connor had targeted rebuilt their lives, knowing they had escaped a nightmare that could have ended them. Detective Mercer stood outside the courthouse as the autumn leaves fell, watching the press scramble for quotes. Another case closed. Another predator caged. Another life honored by truth and resilience. And yet, in the quiet moments, Mercer wondered. How many more Connors are out there, hiding behind smiles and promises? How many more victims slip through the cracks, unseen and unheard until it's too late? And what price do we pay, as a society, for looking away when the red flags are waving right in front of us?